Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Welcome to Wayback Wednesday, where Joe rambles about something. Just kidding. I found a new thing to pick a name. Let me know what you think. Looks kind of interesting to me. Ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friend. It is this time. Grilling. Okay. It says grilling and chilling with it's starting with a name. Manjo. He has got his 4K, and I believe he just got monetized. All about grilling and cooking. It'd be in the garage, the deck, fire pit, backyard, or even car camping. So those of you who like to grill, here's a channel for you to check out. I'll leave the link. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Okay, Mr. Oh, excuse me. I'm tired. I just got back from the movies. All right, Mr. Bud, tell us something.
Well, today's little history segment, I was doing a little research, and an event happened on April the 14th back in 1942, and it related to events in World War II. But to go ahead and tell the story proper, you have to go all the way back to the very beginning of World War II. You have to go back to, in September, when Germany decided it was going to take Poland by force and started off World War II. They went ahead and attacked with tanks and fighters and lots of soldiers and wagons. And of course the British and the French did a symbolic gesture of declaring war on Germany, which, they didn't send any actual soldiers. But what became the interesting part of this happened 2 weeks later, when the Soviet Union, who had a non-aggression pact with the Germans, invaded Poland from the other side, basically dividing the country of Poland between the two superpowers. And it was probably the most best way to say it was a stab in the back, because Poland, surprisingly enough, actually had an army that was close to the same size as Germany. The only problem is that whereas Germany had tanks, the cream of the Polish crop was horse-drawn wagons and field artillery to that regard. Well, the thing that made the situation pretty bad was that whereas Germany, there was no real way to hide the fact that they hated the Jewish faith. They did not like Jews. They were rounding them up and sending them off to camps for various purposes, slave labor, eventual execution, extermination, the kindest way to put it. Now, Russia, on the other hand, they had a more of a darker ulterior motive. They were rounding up people that they felt would be problematic. They were going after people who were capitalists, people who had ideas, industrialists, anybody who, if you were building a communist country, might be trouble. And so, as things happened, whereas the two countries met each other, Germany and the Soviet Union, if the Jews were on one side of the line, they had no problem with sending them over to Germany. And if you were an industrialist or a capitalist or somebody of political importance who was not a fan of the Soviet Union, they usually shipped you back over to the Soviet side of the line. And as things went along, slowly but surely, the two sides, had their own happy little, areas that they controlled as it was commonly referred to as the phony war occurred. Meanwhile, deep behind enemy lines, the people of Poland were not seeing very good treatment as far as anything goes. The Jews, obviously, some of them managed to stay in the ghetto in Warsaw. Most of them were turned over and put into camps for their purposes. The ones that were in the Soviet Union, though, is almost like a complete blackout on information. And then an event happened in, like I was saying, April 1942. After the Germans had decided that they were no longer going to be nice neighbors, invaded the Soviet Union. And as they invaded the Soviet Union, certain large graves were being discovered. And what was really crazy is that these were Polish nationals who were in uniform. And what made it really bizarre is that, here it was in April, and these guys were in winter uniforms. And so it really started making people wonder what exactly was going on. Hitler, in an effort to use it as a propaganda tool, invited, if I remember right, the Red Cross to come in and examine and identify what they had seen, what they had discovered. And in this place called Katyn, there were several of these mass graves that they had discovered. Well, of course, Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, immediately was like, oh, no, it's got to be a horrible mistake. This is something the Germans had done. Because, Germans like to exterminate people. Well, the only problem with the story that they had there was that, well, again, the fact that at the time that this massacre had happened, the Soviet Union was still in control of that part of Poland. So then all of a sudden, you had kind of a quandary occur. The Polish government in exile in London was very upset about the matter, because here was an allied nation that butchered Polish people. They were talking somewhere in the tune of 20,000 people were executed, all because they were Polish nationals who, were part of the government, part of businesses. They were basically the what would be considered the brains of the country should Poland get back, after World War II. As news would start to leak out with the uniforms, it really gave a black eye to Stalin. And of course, London, with Winston Churchill and stuff, was really in kind of a pickle, because how do you tell a country that's your ally, you've done a bad thing? I mean, if it wound up driving a wedge between the Soviet Union and Britain, all of a sudden the Soviet Union might decide to not fight the Germans anymore. Although, granted, at this particular time, Germany was, pretty deep into the Soviet Union's middle ground, or as the Germans like to call it, Lebensraum. But as things would turn out later, when the Soviet Union was able to finally mount their counterattack and retake the Katyn area, they brought in their so-called experts who, were able to find the massive bodies, and with some very poorly orchestrated paperwork, tried to say that, oh yes, this is definitely the work of the German people. Don't worry about the uniforms. That's something perfectly normal.
They're in hiding.
The fact that they just grabbed whatever they wanted to for clothing and purposes. Now, two other things that came out of this situation, not only with the Polish people, but also the fact that Stalin, you could almost say Stalin was already gearing up for a Cold War. Here it wasn't even done with World War II yet. But there were things that Stalin was trying to do to start controlling parts of Europe. And granted, when they met at the Yalta Conference, and they made decisions on how they would divide up Europe after World War II, Stalin was already pushing for that way before the conference. By destroying this part of the Polish political system, getting rid of people that they would deem troublemakers, it made it easier so that when the Soviet Union started so-called liberating and helping countries resettle after World War II, they would be able to put certain people into power and certain groups into power in these countries. One of the things that was really also crazy was that while the Soviet Union was quickly annihilating Germany and their armies, there was a point where Warsaw was going to have an uprising. And their timing would have been almost beautiful because, here comes the Russians. Let's liberate Warsaw and, we'll be free. Well, then all of a sudden the Russians decided to do two things. One, they stopped dead in their tracks. It was like, oh, well, you guys are free. Go ahead and fight it out. They were expecting the Soviet forces to help them, But the way that the Soviets pretty much looked at the idea was that, well, if the Poles and the Germans wiped each other out, there would be less problem for them to fight with. Kind of makes sense. But then, beyond that, from what I was reading, I guess the Soviet Union wouldn't even allow British or American aircraft into the area to try to help the folks in the Warsaw Uprising. They just pretty much said, no, we're just, we'll wait a good couple weeks, and then we'll start up our forces, and we'll have pretty much a straight shot all the way to Berlin. Now, you could go ahead and fast forward, for history's sake. I was talking to a couple fellows via our buddies on Facebook, and the Polish War Museum folks. I guess in 1990, a good, 40 years after World War II had ended, Mikhail Gorbachev released documents that pretty much put the finger on Stalin being responsible for the entire Katyn episode. For a long time, Katyn was almost considered a bad word in Polish Communist Party circles. If you were to make a comment about Katyn, You would either get a visit from their secret police and told never to mention it again, or it could even cost you your job. It could cost you a position at the local university. But it turns out that this wasn't just a simple case that they had a problem with. Needless to say, the Soviet Union seems to have a lot of blood on their hands when it came to smaller republics that were, butchered and brutalized by the Soviet Union. But as it is, now Poland is seeing its way back to freedom. Several other countries, of course, the Soviet Union itself eventually wound up getting rid of communism. Of course, they're still fighting with fragments of that history. We won't talk much about Putin and his buddies. But it's interesting now that, it's one of the things the Poles celebrate is that they still look at the fact that they were willing to try and fight for their own independence. After X number of years of being under German control, they were willing to try and rebel and recapture their own capital, which you got to give them credit for. But a little taste of history, looking back into things. The big thing is that a lot of people try to say that, Poland didn't put up much of a fight. Actually, they put up more of a fight than most people realize. Not just, with Poland itself at the very beginning. Once Warsaw, was occupied, they had the Jewish ghetto, and they fought to liberate themselves. They had forces from Poland that would actually go on to make really good arm wings with the British Air Force. Several divisions wound up serving in the Western Front as well. Sosabowski, one of my particular favorite generals, was actually located in Operation Market Garden, although he had kind of a funny way of putting it. When they were laying out the blueprints for Operation Market Garden, and Browning was trying to explain, oh yeah, you're going to be on the third wing that deploys at Arnhem. And he says, well, where are we landing? And he says, well, it's not really on these pictures here. It's way over here on the far side of the map. And he looked at Browning and he says, I'm just checking to see what side you're on. Because Sosabowski, his other great thing was that when they finally did get a chance to deploy his men, and they deployed to the southern side of the Rhine River, he had made the joking comment. He said, we'd love to get into the fight, sir. Truly we would. Our men can't swim. And so they had to real quickly scramble, and they brought up these fun little assault boats called ducks. Okay. And they were instrumental in helping actually to close the pocket at Oosterbeek, which I thought was kind of a neat operation, given all the chaos that went wrong in that particular battle. But as things, some of the other things that happened with Poland in World War II, Hitler, a lot of people say that if Hitler would have treated people better, he could have had a lot more armies, because the Polish, like I said, the Polish army was actually pretty decently sized as far as manpower, equipment. I remember reading one time that they're also fiercely loyal to their country. One time they actually held off a neat little town crossing area with the odds of about, 1 to 200 men, but they managed to hold it off for almost 2 days. which is pretty crazy when the whole border is coming alive with German soldiers. But then once Germany controlled Poland, they started turning Poland almost into a laboratory for the construction of synthetic oil, because, well, Germany didn't have any natural oil reserves themselves. And so they started using up forestry area and building several large-scale projects that were supposed to almost be like a, you almost want to call it a rest and refresh station off of the coast up there by the Gulf. And they had these huge, absolutely huge, they almost reminded you of a super hotel, because it was literally 3 large buildings, and when they needed to rest and regather themselves after fighting in a war, they could go out here and take a vacation. The only thing is that I guess it was less of a vacation and more of a proper indoctrination process that these poor guys went into. But of course, the Poles, their country cut in half, and a number of them went in different directions. What was left of their forces slowly made their way across Europe to try to fight in other campaigns. The aircraft, of course, made their flights probably first to France and then over to England. They were willing to keep fighting the Germans even if their homeland was captured. So they were willing to keep finding places that they could be put to use. But of course, it was also kind of stupid because Russia was pretty much in the exact same boat. Had Russia treated the Poles halfway, humanely, they might have had some pretty decent soldiers that would have been able to offer a first line of defense against the Germans. But instead, they took out a bunch of them and buried them in large funeral areas in a place called Katyn. But that was our little dose of history for from the bearded one. And we're also going to be looking at a couple pieces regarding the what I'm going to call our military blunders. Places where, if things would have gone right, or if people would have thought about what they were doing before they actually went out and tried it. We're going to look at both the positives and the negatives. You'll see things where, something in war, if would have been thought about, might have had a different outcome. But if you have an idea for a wonder blunder, let me know in the comments, and we'll see if we can pop it up for next week. But this has been the Bearded Historian. You folks have a good one, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.